It's actually kind of hot. I'm going to take this off. All right. What's going on? Today I am going to start a 3-part series on anxiety. Now, I don't personally have anxiety as far as I know, but I noticed that whenever on YouTube, a lot of views on anxiety related videos. So I figured that it was a popular topic, and I didn't really know even how to define anxiety or what it really was. Again, because I don't really feel that I experience it. So I wanted to throw together one of my classic short books just for me to get a little bit more familiarity on the topic. So here we go. This first one is more like the introductory video. All right, here are the contents. And again, if you want this, all my books are free. You will be able to see the link down below, pygmalier.com/masculine. You can pick up any of my ebooks for free. Hope they help. All right, forward. So, why you should be anxious. So, anxiety is a lot of the uncontrollable negative thoughts. It's your body being in a state of high alert, constantly worrying about the future, about what could go wrong. It's enough to make anyone think that they're crazy. But my contention is that it's totally justified. Your anxiety is totally justified, and you'd actually be crazy not to be anxious because the world is unpredictable. The world is scary. We are vulnerable, and we could all literally die or get seriously injured at any point in our lives. The only guarantee is death and taxes. And so maybe people who are anxious is actually, maybe the anxiety is realistic and reasonable, because thinking about what can go wrong and anticipating problems before they arise, that's a sign of intelligence. So it's not crazy at all. And here I get a little bit dramatic. I talk about anxiety as emerging from a dose of clarity regarding the true nature of reality. Like, yes, it can get overwhelming to cope with, but it's not delusional, because civilization is thin, people are chaotic and unpredictable. The fact that we exist at all, no one knows what's going on with that. We will all die and turn to dust relatively quickly. Again, things are out of our control. And so why should we assume that the normal response to all the tragic, arbitrary, and potentially malevolent conditions of the human experience, why should we be calm and serene when faced with that? We should go crazy. We should be anxious, given the obvious insanity of the world. It makes sense. And the reason why I start my little ebook in this way is because there's generally, from my perception, a lot of confusion, a lot of shame regarding anxiety. People consider it like something that's invented, or maybe people consider it a sign of weakness. They consider a personal failing. They tell people to just get over it. It's all in your head, etc. Like, people don't really have the resources to deal with anxiety. And when you try to share the fact that you have it with the world, a lot of people, they don't know, like even myself, someone who tries to go into this therapeutic work, I didn't really know what it was. And so for someone who doesn't experience it, we don't really get it. And we just think, like, just suck it up, right, and deal with it. But the reason why I start the way I do is so that instead of seeing it as a sickness or some personal failing, we see it as actually, it makes sense. And there's almost a distinctive wisdom about it. And when we can reinterpret the way we view anxiety in this way, we can give it a greater dignity, and we can be more compassionate with people who experience anxiety and look to resolve it in that way. And so we don't exacerbate our own suffering or the suffering of others by trying to belittle or suppress how they're feeling. So In, in summary, it's a legitimate concern, health concern. We should treat it with the same level of seriousness and compassion as any other condition. And through this perspective, instead of belittling it, is the only way we're going to find the liberating, nourishing, and deeper solutions. That's how I begin. Next, I go into when anxiety becomes an issue. So I talk about stress and fear and how those are normal parts of life. Like we all have instances when we get stressed, we all have instances when fear comes up that's healthy. Our negative emotion system, quote unquote negative or future oriented, and I talk about this in a little bit more detail when I talk about emotions, which the videos are somewhere out there. Basically, our negative emotion system, our future oriented emotion system, it keeps us prepared, it helps us focus, it helps us prevent painful events or failures, it helps us be careful. So there's an evolutionary survival advantage to experiencing fear, experiencing anxiety. But the problem is when we start feeling this way all the time, when it becomes debilitating and it affects our ability to cope with life's demands, right? And so with fear, and so again with stressful or fearful situations, usually when those things pass, we forget about it and we move on. And so fear and anxiety, they're both part of that our body's natural fight, flight, or freeze protection system. But fear is usually a response to something that's immediate. And again, it disappears once that immediate threat is gone. With anxiety, it's usually some arbitrary, like future anticipated event or a series of conditions that, is vague and it tends to last much longer. And again, when it becomes an issue, when these thoughts, dread, apprehension, uneasiness, and the rest of the physical symptoms persist, and they can even get worse over time because the symptoms compound. For example, if it helps you, if your anxiety prevents you from sleeping, or prevents you from digesting food well, or you get very tense, and then your muscles are tired, and then then your poor sleep just reinforces the cycle, and then you get unhealthy, and then it's just a downward cycle, and then it can really disrupt your life. Lastly, anxiety is not at all uncommon. So based on some estimates, about 16% of individuals have or had an anxiety disorder. I think that's like 1 in 7, maybe. Yeah, my percentages are a bit off. But again, a lot of people don't receive treatment. Sometimes insurance doesn't cover it. People trivialize it. They don't think receiving help will do any good. They think that, there's maybe some shame around it. And sometimes people just don't take it seriously. And I'm here to tell you that it's serious and that you deserve to be treated and looked at and cared for and address this as a serious issue, because it is a signal from your body that something's going on, right? And so we don't want to ignore or suppress these signals. We want to honor them. So what are some physical symptoms of anxiety? So it's a dysfunctional manifestation of our fight, flight, or freeze system. So I go into a little bit the science very briefly with the amygdala, hypothalamus. Again, our muscles tense, maybe your heart rate, breathing increases, blood pressure rises, you become very aware, maybe you start sweating, dizzy, nervous, feeling restless. And normally, this is kept in check by our rational thinking. So maybe we get nervous or fearful or anxious about something, but then we can think through like, okay, this doesn't make sense. And then it suppresses that activation. But with anxiety, a lot of times our ability to rationalize is diminished. And so we are not able to regulate that, and we keep getting more and more nervous or worried. Longer term symptoms, trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating. Again, these reinforce one another. As you have trouble sleeping and you don't sleep, You have more difficulty concentrating, get more irritable, pains, digestive problems, and more. And it's the part of your brain, the lizard part of your brain, cockroach part, that tells you you're in danger or that you're not safe. And thanks to Uncle Jay, Jordan Peterson, it's basically when we shrink, when confronted by the dragon of chaos, the outside world is too much for us to handle. It's outside of our circle of competence. So we freak out, we become submissive, we become hunched and small, and then we focus just on our own inadequacies. As most mental health issues there are concerned, that are subjective. They vary depending on each person's personality, our experiences, our upbringing, genetics, etc. As I mentioned, it's more common than people realize, and that it matters. So some basic types, I won't go into too much detail here. There's generalized anxiety. There's specifically related to social environments, feeling like you're constantly being judged. Selective mutism is, for example, kids who can speak at home, but with people they're comfortable with, but once they get into a school situation, they can't speak. OCD, where you feel like you have to repeat specific behaviors. Separation anxiety, being away from certain people. Illness anxiety, where you're constantly thinking that something you're going to get sick or something. And phobias, just being afraid of a specific object, situation, or activity. Sometimes people also experience panic attacks, which is this intense feeling, fear or terror within 10 to 20 minutes. It can feel like a heart attack, chest pain, feeling of choking, losing control, impending doom, etc., etc. And the other tricky part with anxiety is that there are a lot of medical conditions that anxiety can be a symptom for, such as PTSD, depression, depressive disorders, inflammatory conditions, and substance abuse. So it's all very linked together. Diagnosing anxiety. So the first thing that doctors want to do is make sure that you don't have some underlying medical condition that is causing your anxiety symptoms. And so you want to make sure they'll do a series of tests to make sure you don't have heart disease or respiratory problems, or again, because so many of these things can be tied together. So diagnosing anxiety for me, again, as this independent transformational guide work, I'm not big on diagnoses because they just tell you what you have and not why you have it. But if I was a licensed therapist, I guess they would go into these questionnaires and using these manuals and stuff to be able to label you somehow. These are some of the criteria, you have to have symptoms lasting 6 months, different with children. But at the end of the day, if you have these kind of symptoms, it's worth addressing. As a side note, so general anxiety and phobias are shown to be about twice as prevalent in females and males, whereas social anxiety is about equal. They're diagnosed more common in people from 35 to 55. As far as I know, there's no concrete explanation as to why these disparities exist. We do know that women score higher on trait neuroticism, which is one of the big 5 personality traits, and that's linked to negative emotion, which again would lead to higher rates of anxiety. All right, that's all for this one. In the next one, I will go into some of the causes. And again, you can get this for free on the website.